Women's suffrage and 19th Amendment. What are women's suffrage and 19th Amendment? What does it do for women? Who started women's suffrage? As we all know, women did not have the right to vote or had limited freedom in the past. In contrast to white men who had more privilege to work, had equal traits, had better pay, had education, and most importantly, had the freedom to vote. Whereas most women stayed at home and took care of their children and did house chores. All of this changed with women's suffrage and the 19th Amendment. The Seneca Fall Convention was held in New York City in 1848, and it was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott to discuss certain issues or women issues that needed action, such as childcare and voting rights. It was primarily about women having freedom and no limitations. Almost 300 women attended. Some were locals, and some men participated and listened to what the women had to say about how they felt and what characteristic they should share. Elizabeth Cady Stanton started the meeting by saying the goal and the purpose of it, which is we are assembled to protest against a form of government existing without the consent of the governed, to declare our right to be free as man is free, to be represented in the government which we are taxed to support, to have such disgraceful laws as give man the power to chastise and imprison his wife, to take the wages which he earns, the property which he inherits, and in case of separation, the children of her love. From the Seneca Fall Convention, women discussed 11 resolutions about women's rights. Women's suffrage was an organization that fought for women's right to vote. 5 individual women joined the women's suffrage movement, and they are Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, Lucy Stone, and Ida B. Wells. These women had played big roles in fighting for women's right to vote. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the women who started the suffrage movement. These two were both fighting on the side of women's issue. Susan B. Anthony was a activist, and she believed that alcohol is a sin and that drinking alcohol is particularly harmful to innocent women and children who suffer from poverty and the violence it causes. Alice Paul was a well educated woman who graduated with a biology degree. She was one of the members of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, but in 1914, Paul left the group and started his own union that is now called the National Women's Party. Lucy Stone is a pioneering abolitionist and a women's rights activist who was lecturer and a traveler for the Anti-Slavery Society and continued this until 1857. Ida B. Wells was a known anti-lynching activist and journalist who was writing for a black newspaper known as The Free Speech. Wells was known for her writing about the different and equal traits of African Americans, such as lack of education, segregation, racist violence, and limited freedom. At President Woodrow Wilson's inauguration celebrations, Wells was ready to join the suffrage parade, but some white people did not want to march alongside the black people. The 19th Amendment was already in place, but it did not guarantee that all women of any color would be able to have the right to vote. According to Christina Rivers, an associate professor of political science at DePaul University, said, for black women, their votes were not lifted in the South. The southern states gave the black women a hard time voting. They only accepted votes based on their race. The 19th Amendment states that the right of a citizen of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Some states in the United States made it possible for women to vote, but others did not, particularly for women of color and Native Americans. Even though the 19th Amendment granted Native men and women the right to vote in 1924, some states, such as Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, did not allow them to vote. They only granted the right to vote in the 1950s. In 1929, Literate Women in Puerto Rico had the right to vote, but not all women, until 1935. Asian Americans were not allowed to vote until 1952, when the Immigration and Nationality Act was passed and allowed them to become a legal citizen. Even though all of the acts and amendments were created in the West and the South, all women of different status or ethnicity still face obstacles from people who are against all the laws that give women the right to vote. In the voting system, black women needed to take literacy tests in order to vote. In this case, they needed to take the test and get a good score to vote. But some people that had the authority to pass and fail them normally failed the black women to prevent them from voting. Rivers said white applicants, including those who only had a second or third grade education and were illiterate, were not required to take this test or were only required to answer one or two questions. There's also evidence of registrars giving them the answers. And with that, some black women end up not voting. Poll taxes in various states also prevent black women from voting because most people in those states are poor and cannot afford education. And white people are the only ones who had the right to vote. Prior to the Voting Rights Act, all women of any kind had an equal right to vote. In conclusion of all of this, the formation of women's suffrage and passing the 19th Amendment in the US Constitution made every woman celebrate. After almost a century of fighting, their long desired freedom and equal treatment will come true. Women who had the courage to speak out and fight for equal rights for men and women. Women who should be treated fairly and not differently because we are all humans and we should love and treat each other equally as humans. In today's century, women of any kind now have the right to vote, to work in any profession, to have better education, and to have the voice to speak and express their feelings. This is the most significant event in history because I believe that if women had not fought for our rights, we would not be experiencing the freedom that we do today. Thank you.